Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much. Welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Great to be with you, Jack.
Appreciate it. So here we are weeks before Election Day, and the Cook Political Report just moved the race down from likely R to lean R. Polls show, the last 4 polls show on average you are leading by less than 5 percentage points, and you're on this 53-stop bus tour. What is your road to victory?
Well, listen, we're crisscrossing the state, and I think this election is going to be about my record versus Colin Allred's record. And I think every election should be about that and about the vision of both candidates for the state. I've spent 12 years fighting every day for 30 million Texans, fighting for jobs, freedom, and security. Jobs is my #1 priority. You get jobs through lower taxes, lower regulations, fighting for small businesses. Freedom, protecting the basic constitutional rights of Texans, free speech, religious liberty, the Second Amendment. And then security, fighting to secure the border, fighting to support law enforcement to keep our families safe. That's a common sense agenda that reflects the values of the people of Texas. On the other hand, Congressman Allred's record has been an extreme left voting record. His first 4 years in the House, he has voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time. He's voted for higher taxes over and over again. He's voted against Texas jobs, against Texas energy, against oil and gas in Texas over and over again. And his record, particularly on the border, has been terrible. He's voted repeatedly for open borders, for catch and release, and that has led to Texans, to our safety being in greater jeopardy. And I'm convinced once the voters have my record in front of them versus his record, that we're going to win.
So even with all that, right, with your record and his record, I hear what you're saying, but the race is still so close.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are, it's red Texas. Yeah. A Democrat hasn't won statewide in 30 years. What's happening? Why is this so close?
Well, listen, we saw this the last time I ran in 2018, that I'm the #1 target for national Democrats. Chuck Schumer's been very explicit in this race that I'm his #1 target. And he's going to spend over $100 million. He may spend as much as $150 million. Everyone watching TV right now, you see Colin Allred ads, every other ad. Now, it's good for the TV stations, but the problem is that much money can impact an election, in particular because if you look at Congressman Allred's record and his ads, there's a huge disconnect. The ads he's running are trying very hard to hide his actual record. Let me give you an example. Let's take the border. Everyone knows my record on the border. I have been the leading defender of securing the border for 12 years. I worked hand in hand with President Trump to secure the border, and we achieved incredible success. We achieved the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Congressman Allred's record, he's voted in favor of open borders over and over and over again. And if you think border security matters, what Colin Allred says is that he says you're a racist. He calls the border wall that racist border wall. He has pledged to personally tear down, quote, that racist border wall. And yet he's right now running millions of dollars of TV ads with him posing in front of the thing he calls that racist border wall. That is a real disconnect between his record and what he's trying to convince the voters of Texas he stands for.
So let me ask you on the border,
Yeah.
because I hear what you're saying about former President Trump's record, and then we saw the influx. And so the problem is that there's no bill that was passed. So it's all up to the presidents and what they decide the policy is going to be. So where is the Senator Cruz bill on this issue?
Well, I've introduced the H.R. 2 in the Senate, the strongest border security bill
that was a
ever
House
introduced. But I've introduced it in the Senate. I've also introduced multiple bills in the Senate. And the reason there was no bill when Donald Trump was president is because Colin Allred and the Democrats blocked every bill. So, for example, I'm the author of Kate's Law. What is Kate's Law? Kate's Law is common sense legislation that says that felons who repeatedly enter the country illegally would face a mandatory minimum prison sentence. Kate's Law was named for Kate Steinle, a beautiful 28-year-old woman who was murdered on a pier in California when a repeat illegal alien shot her, and she bled out, literally died in her father's arms. I've met Kate Steinle's father. The last words she said to her father were "Help me, Daddy." Kate Steinle should not have died, and Kate's Law is the embodiment of common sense legislation. About 80% of Americans support Kate's Law. When I forced a vote in the Senate on Kate's Law, every single Democrat voted no, all of them. Just more recently, Look, in Houston, we saw Jocelyn Nungaray, beautiful 12-year-old girl, raped and murdered by illegal immigrants that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris released. I introduced the Justice for Jocelyn bill that would require that illegal immigrants in the custody of the federal government be detained and not released. If the Justice for Jocelyn bill had been on the books, Jocelyn would still be alive, but the Democrats block any legislation to secure the border.
Is there not an opportunity, though? I mean, you've worked with Democrats before on legislation, on bipartisan legislation. So why isn't a single Democrat then, why aren't you working with them on that?
Because sadly, when it comes to the national Democrats on open borders, they've become radicalized. Let me give an example. There was a bill in the House of Representatives called the Police Act. Police Act says if an illegal immigrant violently assaults a police officer, he should be deported. Now, you and I are in Waxahachie right now. I promise you, any town in Texas, give me 100 Texans in the room, give me 100 Democrats, only Democrats in the room. Let me ask them, if an illegal immigrant beats up a cop, should we deport him? And anyone who is not an idiot would say, of course. Colin Allred voted no. And it really is under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and under Colin Allred, the Democrat Party has gotten so extreme on the border, they support an open border. Look, we just saw Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes, where even 60 Minutes asked her, was it a mistake to allow illegal immigration to quadruple in your administration? They did this deliberately. I wish we had Democrats willing to be reasonable on securing the border, but sadly, Colin Allred has voted no, no, no for every meaningful step to secure the border.
All right, so I want to talk about the economy, but let me ask you about abortion.
Yeah.
So, as you know, Congressman Allred says you are to blame for the near abortion ban here in Texas, and he states, you voted for the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, and you supported the Texas Republicans who in turn passed the law. Why shouldn't you be held accountable for that?
Well, listen, once again, that is Congressman Allred's campaign being deceptive. The Texas law was passed by the Texas state legislature, was signed by the governor. I don't serve in the Texas state legislature. I'm not the governor. And listen, this is important. You look at his ads, he puts me next to two officials in the state government. I serve in the United States Senate, an entirely different body. And here's the important thing to understand about what the Supreme Court said in the Dobbs decision. The Supreme Court said, listen, abortion is an issue people disagree with, and disagree strongly. People of good faith can look at this issue and come to differing conclusions. They could be pro-choice, they could be pro-life. Texans, Americans disagree on this. And what the Supreme Court said is under our Constitution, the way we resolve issues where we've got good faith disagreements is at the ballot box. We let the voters decide. We don't have 9 unelected judges just decree an answer and force it on everyone. And so the result today is that every state adopts its own laws. And of course, Texas adopts different laws than California does. Of course, Florida adopts different laws than New York does. But Congressman Allred is deliberately trying to mislead the voters because the decision of what the laws will be in Texas will be made in Austin by the state legislature and the governor. I am neither. I serve in the United States Senate. And you know what's ironic about this, Jack? It is Congressman Allred whose views on abortion are extreme. So he has voted in favor of federal legislation that would strike down every law in the state of Texas, for example, providing for parental notification or parental consent. Look, there's a wide consensus in Texas that if your daughter is pregnant, that a mom or dad should have a right to know before your daughter has an abortion. And yet Colin Allred has voted to strike that law down. Colin Allred has also voted to strike down Texas's law and literally to legalize abortion in the 8th and 9th month. Now, 90% of Texans agree with that, and yet Colin Allred wants to force that radical policy view on the state of Texas.
But just following up on the state ban.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying about the legislature, but you're not sitting here disagreeing with their decision, are you?
What I'm saying is it's a decision for the state legislature and it's a decision for the voters of Texas. And by the way, if Colin Allred wants to change those rules, he ought to run for the state legislature because they're the ones that are going to be setting the rules and it's going to reflect the values of the voters of Texas.
Let me ask you a question about the Senate filibuster. Vice President Harris says she supports ending the filibuster to codify Roe v. Wade. Where are you on that?
I think it's a terrible idea. And it actually really underscores the stakes of this election. If, God forbid, Kamala Harris is elected president, and if Colin Allred is elected to the Senate. Right now, Chuck Schumer has 49 votes to end the filibuster. The filibuster is the requirement that you need 60 votes to take up major legislation. Colin Allred has promised to be the 50th vote. So if he won, Chuck Schumer would have the votes to end the filibuster. If Schumer ends the filibuster, which he's pledged to do, and Colin Allred would give him the final vote he needs to do it, let me tell you what Schumer would do in January of next year. The first thing he would do is pass S1. S1 is the first bill Schumer introduces in every Senate. It is a federal takeover of every election in the country. It strikes down every election integrity law in Texas. It strikes down the photo ID law in Texas. It legalizes ballot harvesting in Texas. That would be the first bill Schumer would pass. The second bill he would pass would be to add 2 new states to the Union, D.C. and Puerto Rico. They would do that because they believe that would elect 4 new Democrat senators and give Democrats permanent control of the Senate. The third thing they would do is grant amnesty and immediate voting rights to every illegal alien in America. There are about 20 to 30 million illegal immigrants in America. There are 2 to 3 million in Texas. If that happened, Texas would immediately turn blue. If that happened, every statewide elected official would lose the next election. The governor would lose, the lieutenant governor would lose, the attorney general would lose. We have 9 Republican Supreme Court justices. All 9 would lose, and Texas would become California. Not slowly, not gradually, but instantaneously. And the fourth thing that Schumer and Allred would do is pack the U.S. Supreme Court, grow it from 9 justices to 13 justices, put 4 left-wing justices on the court. And that would undermine our basic protections of religious liberty and free speech and all of the Bill of Rights. And I'll tell you, Jack, I don't believe a word I've said is hyperbole. There are 49 votes to do every one of those things today. Colin Allred would be the 50th. And I got to tell you, you and I have known each other a long time. I am by nature an optimist. In fact, there was a woman at this gathering today that had a t-shirt that said Team Optimist. I said, I love that shirt. I'm on that team. I believe in brighter days ahead. I'll tell you, in that scenario, where Colin Allred gives the 50th vote to end the filibuster and the Democrats dismantle our democracy, which is what those votes would do, I don't have an answer to that. I view that as an end to the United States of America you and I have known. And the thing that is frightening is I think most Texans, that they look nationally, they're worried about the direction of the country. But their view is, you know, Texas will be fine regardless, and we are 1 vote away. That's what Colin Allred's vote would deliver to the radical left.
So let's talk about your economic growth plan.
Yeah.
I know you've talked about jobs, but let's talk about the tax cuts, because a decision has to be made about making the Trump tax cuts from 2017 permanent.
Yeah.
So where are you on that? Where are you on Trump's plan for no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, and how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah, so let's take them one at a time. In terms of taxes, I was one of the key authors of the 2017 tax cuts, the biggest tax cut in a generation. And it produced incredible economic results. It produced the lowest rate of unemployment in 50 years, the lowest rate of Hispanic unemployment ever, the lowest rate of African American unemployment ever. That is a big part of the reason I think the American people are going to re-elect President Trump and give us a Republican Senate and House, is because of that economic prosperity. Donald Trump has pledged to extend those tax cuts. Most of them are expiring next year. Kamala Harris and Colin Allred want to let them expire. The Wall Street Journal calls this election the $6 trillion election, because that's the difference between how much your taxes go up under Kamala Harris and Colin Allred versus how much they go down or stay down under Republican leadership. So it is a big difference for every small business, every job creator, every working family in Texas. Now, when you talked about the other proposals on no taxes on tips, I'm actually the lead author of the legislation in the Senate to have no taxes on tips. I will say it was Donald Trump's idea. He actually announced it at a rally in Las Vegas. And when I heard it, I said, that's a fantastic idea. And I went to my team, I said, let's draft that right now. Let's file it. When I filed it, my legislation for no taxes on tips has bipartisan support. Both of the Democrat senators from Nevada immediately joined my legislation. I think Republicans we're a blue-collar party. We're the party of jobs. We ought to be the party of waiters and waitresses. We ought to be the party of barbers and hairstylists and nail manicurists and bellhops and everyone, people doing shoe shines and bartenders. And there are millions of Americans, millions of Texans who get along through tips. I think it's the right thing to do. I also very much agree with no taxes on Social Security. It doesn't make any sense that you spend your entire working life paying into Social Security, earning Social Security, and then when you start to get paid it, the government turns around and taxes it back from you. That doesn't make any sense. In terms of how you pay for it, you know, it's an interesting thing in the 2017 tax cuts. The Democrats, every Democrat voted no. Every Democrat in the House voted no, every Democrat in the Senate voted no. And they said at the time, they said if we cut taxes in 2017, they said federal revenue is going to plummet. Well, it turns out they were wrong. Their predictions, you can go back and look, that's what they said. You know what happened the next year? Federal revenue went up. And you know why it went up? Because the economy took off, because there was more jobs and more economic growth. I'm a big believer in jobs and economic growth. And listen, there's a reason. Millions of people are fleeing states like California and coming to Texas. And it's because California has the kind of policies Colin Allred supports. High taxes, high regulations, they hammer small businesses, and it's really hard to get a job and survive. And they come to Texas because Texas is where the jobs are, and we got to keep Texas, Texas.
The CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
You've gotten a lot of criticism for voting against the CHIPS Act. And so I'm wondering, I know you have said that you opposed the way it was handled, the direct giving of money to companies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And you also tried to amend it, and it didn't work. And so I'm wondering, why then, what was your decision process to say, all right, I'm going to oppose this bill, instead of just saying this is still going to be a win for Texas and for the country?
So I will say, Jack, your facts are a little bit out of date. So let me update. So the original CHIPS Act was a series of bills that was combined together. One of them was a bill called the FABS Act. The FABS Act I was a co-sponsor of. I was a vocal proponent of, and that reduced, put more favorable taxation for building new semiconductor plants. I was a very strong proponent of it. There was another component of the CHIPS Act that was billions of dollars of federal taxpayer monies going directly to private corporations. I think history has shown that that is a bad idea, to have the taxpayers giving billions of dollars to giant private companies. It often leads to corruption. It leads to bad outcomes. So I voted no against the combined bill because I didn't want taxpayer money going straight to giant corporations. It passed. Once it passed, I had been vocal and vigorous saying, all right, if the federal government's going to spend that money, the federal government should spend it in Texas. That if it's going to go anywhere, once it's coming out, it needs to be in Texas. I'm the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, so I've got jurisdiction over every dollar of that money, and I've been vigorously engaging with making sure as much of that money as possible is spent in Texas. Now, here's the part that's out of date. You said that I tried to amend it. What I tried to do is I introduced legislation. I teamed up with Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly is a Democrat from Arizona. And the problem was, we were seeing billions of dollars being invested in new semiconductor manufacturing plants. And then suddenly they were running into environmental regulations that were delaying these plants 3, 4, 5 years. And it was a huge problem. So I teamed up with Mark Kelly. We drafted legislation together. That legislation was the Kelly Cruz legislation. And what it did is it streamlined the environmental permitting for new semiconductor manufacturing plants built in Texas and across the country. Now, Kelly Cruz, Mark and I together worked. We got bipartisan support in the Senate. We passed it out of the Senate unanimously. It then went to the House, and just a couple of weeks ago, the House took it up on the floor of the House. And Kelly Cruz, my legislation, got overwhelming bipartisan support. I had over 70 Democrats vote for my legislation. Actually, Colin Allred voted for my legislation, streamlining the environmental permitting on semiconductor manufacturing. And just last week, Joe Biden signed it into law. Now, if you want to know the impact of my legislation on semiconductor manufacturing, take it from Joe Biden's Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, who testified before the House of Representatives. She said the single biggest thing Congress could do to speed up new semiconductor manufacturing in the United States is to pass the Cruz-Kelly legislation. That's exactly what Congress has done, and the result of that is billions of new dollars being invested in Texas and thousands of new jobs. And I got to say that is part and parcel of my record over 12 years, I've authored and passed 101 different pieces of legislation. Actually, my legislation streamlining new semiconductor manufacturing plants was the 101st piece of legislation. In contrast, Colin Allred, in his time in Congress, has authored and passed 3 pieces of legislation. He has not been able to write legislation and pass it into law. What he's done is voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time, but not moved real legislation. That's why I said this election's going to be about my record versus his record, and there's a huge difference.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much.
Thank
we
you, Jack.
appreciate it. Safe travels.